Hello everyone, this is Camille Morley from Remax Mountain View, and I'm also a real estate educator here in Alberta. We are privileged today to have with us two guest speakers, Lou Pesta from Walsh LLP and Lowell Martens from Remax Mountain View, broker owner for about 22 years. Our guest speakers today are going to be talking about the situation here in Calgary and southern Alberta with the floods, and also specifically regarding deals that are coming due in the next few weeks and in the next few months. So Lowell, can you share with us a little bit about some of the phone calls that you have been receiving?
Well, certainly lately, those last few days, we have a lot of concerned buyers wanting to know what's going to happen. Did my house get flooded? If in fact it did get flooded, to what extent did it get flooded? And do I still have to close? Do I have to take any sense of responsibility for this? So there's a certain amount of anxiety among some buyers. I think most people in the city here recognize that this is a disaster, natural disaster that happened, and certainly no fault of the sellers or anything to that effect. So they understand that aspect, but they don't know what their position is now. Can I get possession? What happens if I get possession of a property or can't get possession of a property? And then there's other sales involved that are tied to these deals.
Right.
What are the responsibilities in those areas? These people selling properties that have had extensive water damage. If the buyer doesn't close, what's my responsibility? Where do I go with this?
Right.
Can I get, am I in breach, or could I be put in breach? So these are the sort of questions that are getting thrown at realtors, certainly at brokers. And Lou, it's great to have you here to be able to maybe help answer some of those questions. So.
Yeah, no, I'd be glad to. I guess what I would like to start off with is maybe sharing some experiences we've had over the past 4 or 5 days. And frankly, it has been a stressful time. But the level of anxiety we had in our office, simply being shut out of the building and evacuated Friday morning, certainly pales in comparison to what other law firms and other people have been through. I certainly feel for the lawyers in High River, for example. There are other law firms in downtown Calgary that have not been able to get back into their offices yet. They're frustrated because they're interested in serving their clients, but they don't have access to their client files. And so with all of these problems, I've experienced an extraordinary degree of cooperation and goodwill from both other lawyers on the other sides of the files, other clients on it. To give you an example, we had $1.5 million purchase closing on Friday. We were unable to pay that money to the seller's lawyer because we were evacuated at 11 o'clock in the morning. They cooperated as far as releasing keys to the buyer. They waived the late interest over the weekend, which was beyond what would normally be expected. And so they were entirely understanding and cooperative in that respect. And we've had situations where people could not do walkthroughs. We had a possession on the weekend in Bowness. It was within the evacuation zone. The feeling was that the home likely was not damaged, but nobody could go in there to look at it. We had an agreement to postpone the closing until such time as the evacuation was lifted. No late interest charged. We closed that yesterday. There thankfully was no damage to the property. We closed it a few days late, but it worked out eventually. I have a closing in downtown Calgary where there is no electricity to a condominium building. At least wasn't until yesterday. Again, possession was scheduled, but nobody could do a walkthrough. I wasn't about to ask my realtor to go in there with a flashlight and climb up 5 flights of stairs and look at the unit.
That's right.
And so we called the seller's lawyers. They consulted with their client. Closing was extended until the inspection could take place. Those are the easy ones. And by the way, along the same lines, we have a sale in Canmore. I was mentioning to Camille. My sellers signed up yesterday. They drove in from Canmore. They indicate their home was not damaged, but their town is off limits. And now their concern is that they're not going to be able to get a moving van to come into Canmore to move them out on time, and so they're not going to be able to provide vacant possession.
Right.
So we're dealing with those types of little issues. Those are the small ones, and people are able to work them out.
Right.
When you look at damage to the property, when you look at a home that's actually in a flood zone along the Elbow River, there are properties, I understand, in lower benchland that have just been washed away with the river, and especially places in High River, which is still not accessible.
Right.
You take a look at various degrees of damage to the property in terms of the legal recourse that a buyer might have. So we all know in a contract there's a provision about the property being in, quote, substantially the same condition as it was in when the contract was signed. Well, substantially the same condition means that it doesn't have to be exactly the same, and a certain amount of damage would be acceptable, reasonable, wear and tear. When you're looking at a floodplain flood, you can presume that most properties would be beyond that. It would not be in substantially the same condition as it was in when the contract was signed. And so you have the lowest category, then you have a middle category, and then you have the real bad category on the other end of the spectrum, where the property is simply not capable of being conveyed as per what was contracted for. And so if the home is actually truly moved on the foundation, or if the house washes away with the river, there is a legal concept which is called frustration of contract or impossibility. Under the common law, that contract would terminate. Buyer would be entitled to get their deposits back and walk away from the property, and unfortunately the seller would inherit that property. And if he has insurance, he might be able to make a claim under the insurance policy. Unfortunately, most individual homeowners will not have coverage for flood damage. So then it becomes a question of where do they get the financial means to repair or rebuild their property. There might be some emergency fund assistance they might be able to secure, but all of those things will take time.
If I can maybe just interject here a bit. In a situation like that, where you have a frustrated transaction, that seller obviously can't close because of that situation. But he, on the strength of that sale, has purchased another property. It may not be in Calgary, it could be in Toronto. Now, he would be in breach if he can't close that one. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that is absolutely correct, and that's an unfortunate part of it. He would have repercussions that go beyond the frustrated sale, where he might not be able to meet his obligations on other transactions. And they're going to have to be looked at on a case-by-case individual basis, but frankly, it would create potential legal liability for that homeowner for no fault of his own, because really the two deals are not tied together. They're separate transactions. And the seller, even if it is a seller in Toronto, has a binding unconditional sale contract that he can't complete on, and he may have a purchase of his own. And he relied on that sale, to finance the purchase of another property. It has a domino effect. Where do you stop it? And frankly, the person that has the demolished home is in a bind. At that point in time, will the banks be prepared to accommodate him? Will they give him bridge financing? Will they allow for the mortgage to proceed on the purchase end of the deal, even though the sale, he's unable to pay off his mortgage? Those are the questions, for the banks to address. One would hope that they would be more understanding and cooperative in those instances as well. But of course, again, they would be looked at on a case-by-case basis.
Right, okay. Friday morning, actually, I was getting lots of calls. I was getting people that were, and mostly realtors that were they were getting calls from their buyers and saying, uh-oh, I think my house is really close to this area. What am I going to do? Can I close? And then of course those people who were kicked out of the house, they had to ask to leave. They had no way of knowing, to what extent the house is even damaged. So this is such uncharted ground that nobody really quite knows. Where do we go from this? And we really need that water to drop, find out what the damage is, and then determine what sort of a problem we have. And then, of course, there's always that fear of, okay, we got to get contractors in here. I mean, these contractors are going to be up to their eyebrows in work. And when can this actually get done?
And the material, that's another thing. Well, how much material is out there, and when is new material coming in? We got a call from one of our sellers, and he had 2 meters of water in his basement, in actually Sunnyside. And like you were saying, after the water and the emergency day went, they opened the sewers, and all his water just went right into the drain, of course, and there was no more water in his basement. Now he is in the process of course, of demolishing all the drywall in the basement space, and of course he wants to talk to the buyer about this and see how they can compensate one another in terms of making this possible for the buyer to close. And of course there's no damage to the upper area of the home, it's just the basement. So
well, there is one more complication on that topic, and what Lowell raised. I had a call from a builder yesterday actually. He's building a home nearing completion, but is unable to get city inspectors to inspect the electrical, inspect the plumbing.
Right.
And now he's concerned that he's going to be delayed in terms of the construction project, possibly not be able to provide possession as scheduled under the contract. And so the lack of inspectors the lack of the ability to get development and building permits, and keep in mind, anybody who is doing any significant renovations in their basements always ought to get the proper permits from the City of Calgary.
For sure.
That's going to be a factor for weeks and months to come, as all of the City of Calgary inspectors are tied up in just inspecting buildings, existing buildings for damage, and bridges and what have you. And so that is truly a problem for anybody who's doing any sort of construction work at the present time.
I understand, Lou, that there is in fact, I just heard the other day on the radio, I think it was, because there's always a concern, okay, prices are going to go up and all this sort of stuff. But apparently in a disaster situation, they can't be charging above what they normally would charge. It's actually against the law, is that right?
You mean construction workers? Yes.
And pretty much anybody, I think, that's involved.
That is correct. Now, I only speak from what I've seen on the media myself during the early days where people were looking to charge extra for water or ice. And price gouging is an offense under the law in an emergency situation. But very difficult to prove. I mean, all of these renovations are going to be done on a case-by-case basis. Is it actually gouging, or is it just the market reality that's out there at the present time? When contractors will have more than enough business and can be selective in what type of work they do. So yes, there is a law, but on the other hand, very difficult to prove that somebody's actually engaging in that type of practice.
That's true. Good point.
So Lou, can you share with us a little bit about condominiums, because a lot of their main areas have been affected, and as we were just chatting before, our listeners might be very interested in what you have to say regarding this issues with condominiums and insurance.
Again, to be looked at on a case-by-case basis, but if somebody is buying a conventional condominium and their unit is located on a higher floor that came out unscathed in the flood, and the condominium might have the parking level flooded and it might have some damage to the common areas, technically there should be insurance available for that loss. Commercial insurance has different terms in it and different coverage than residential coverage on single residential homes. And so the first step would be to call the management company, the condominium corporation, take a look at the insurance policy and see if the damage to the common areas will in fact be covered by insurance. If a person is able to get confirmation that that is the case, there really, in my view, should be little difficulty in completing that transaction. So long as the buyer is still able to move in, notwithstanding the damage. I mean, if the damage to the building is such that the buyer is physically unable to take possession of their unit because the building is still not open for business, that does raise other issues beyond the financial loss, to the building. But I know that most buyers will be concerned about a potential special assessment. Am I coming into a situation where right away I'm going to be in a financial bind? That would not necessarily be a valid concern, once they can verify that the insurance is in place. But there is still the dilemma about being able to or not being able to take physical possession of their unit. And then, hopefully the lawyers will be able to resolve that depending on what the timeline is and what the circumstances of each particular case are.
Yeah, and we have been hearing a lot of goodwill gestures between lawyers, between buyers and sellers, and actually a lot of our realtors and members of the public are out there helping. I've heard of a story yesterday from one of our agents who actually has gone out for 2 consecutive days. He has seen other realtors out there helping out with members of the public, actually cleaning up some of the mission area properties that are really damaged, and there's young people out there that are living in basement suites that are totally flooded, and so there is goodwill out there. But of course, those members of the public that are in such circumstances don't have access to, to their home and their computers and so on. So hopefully they are able to view this on YouTube and get some comfort that we do think about them, and we are concerned as real estate practitioners, lawyers, and so hopefully you can get the relief that you need in the community, and the goodwill of Calgarians and surrounding area is really just amazing. And maybe you have a few stories that you want to share, both of you gentlemen.
Well,
go ahead,
in terms of the legal community, I can tell you that there are a number of lawyers in downtown Calgary, as I've mentioned, that were simply not able to get back into their offices. I was privy to a number of email communications among those lawyers. There were other lawyers that stepped up to the plate, offered their office space for the displaced lawyers to come in and physically carry on their practice free of charge, no expectation. There are lawyers that offered to actually take files from the displaced lawyers and close the deals on their behalf.
Wow, that's
with no,
awesome.
no personal gain on their end. So truly the amount of goodwill is unsurpassed. I think it's tremendous. Having said that, goodwill only goes so far.
Right.
And if a person is in a tragic situation, where they have encountered a home that's being demolished, goodwill cannot fix that.
Yes.
Ultimately, the law takes over. It will determine who is on the right side and the wrong side of the law.
Right.
There are no winners or losers here, but unfortunately, somebody is going to come out on the short end of the stick
Yes.
if there is no proper insurance. And I did want to mention one point.
Yes.
We spoke about this briefly. People making claims under their insurance policies
Yes.
should really be getting legal advice before they file those claims with the insurers. If they phrase their claim correctly, they may have coverage. And so the one example I'll give you, residential
Yes.
policies, generally no coverage for overland floods, but there is coverage for losses caused by sewer backup.
Yes.
And when you looked at the coverage that the media had, even people in Sunnyside pumping out their basements, you could see that water was coming in through the toilets. If that's the case, then you could phrase your claim as a sewer backup event rather than a flooding event, and you may get coverage, for some of your losses. So very important that people not rush out to make their claims
Right.
on their own. They should likely be seeking proper legal advice, have their policies looked at. There may be parts of the policy that they may be able to advance a claim under, and they don't want to, rush out and potentially, create a situation where they're denied.
That's good.
This may not be a question that you could actually answer, but I'm going back to that situation where a seller is in the spot. If buyers get concerned about buying properties and what are they inheriting here, but you also have sellers saying, oh, my land I can't deliver now, and I've already committed to another purchase. We're in a totally different jurisdiction. I use Toronto as an example, but how do you think a court in another jurisdiction would react to that? Maybe it's an unfair question to ask you, but say, look, I can't close because my house kind of got wiped off my foundation, and now what am I going to do?
Lowell, unfortunately, when it comes to the contract between buyer and seller,
Yeah.
the reason why a seller can't close is usually not a factor. It's a question of black and white. Are you able to pay or not? So, I'll give you a completely different example. If I have a buyer who has mortgage financing and has waived all his conditions, and unfortunately is laid off from work before the completion date, he's still considered to be in breach of the contract if the mortgage company will no longer give him the mortgage financing. The fact that he was laid off may not be no fault of his own. There simply may not be enough business for the employer to continue to employ him. But from the seller's point of view, all the seller knows is he was relying on that money coming in. It's not coming in. And so the reason that the buyer can't complete is irrelevant. It becomes a question of, has he paid the money or not? So I would think in that example that we have, harsh as it is, the seller would still be considered to be in breach of the contract. Now, we've already had the provincial government announce some emergency relief. Hopefully there will be the federal government stepping up with some cash financial relief as well. And perhaps people who find themselves in these positions that have suffered a financial loss might be able to make a claim under those. I don't know if they will or not. It all depends on how that emergency relief is drawn up. Certainly if there was no insurance available to people for these losses, and they've done all they can, one would hope that there's going to be some opportunity to get some relief somewhere.
Okay, well, that's a good answer. Thanks.
Okay. Another issue, this is along the same lines, all the reconstruction that's going to be going on. They had an economist from one of the major banks on the radio show the other day, and he says, look, I'm not happy talking about this, but there is a silver lining. In essence, there is going to be a bit of a mini economic boom now with all of the construction going on, the materials that people are going to buy, extra work and business generated for the economy. At the same time, you truly feel, for the people that are affected by these floods, and it does not diminish the loss that they've had. But long term, there is a bit of a silver lining in terms of the economic recovery that this is going to involve.
But there is a definite problem in Calgary because there is a shortage of rentals and of units, and that is going to bring down the volume, and as a result of active properties on the market, so that might drive price up.
Oh, sure.
So that could create a problem for some of the purchasers at this time.
Yeah.
No question. It's a difficult time for a lot of people.
It is.
And the estimates of the damage, now they're saying the second worst disaster in Canadian history, second only to the ice storms in Ontario and
Wow.
Quebec.
Wow.
They're talking in the neighborhood of up to $5 billion, in terms
Yes.
of total losses. So a tremendous, loss
Yeah.
overall.
Yeah. Well, so our hearts goes out to
Yeah.
those that are affected by that, and hopefully there is enough relief for the government and other bodies, government bodies, to help through this process.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that this answers some of your questions, and thank you for watching our video. And please give Lowell or myself a call. The Calgary Real Estate Board is going to be having a session next week regarding this matter with a panel. Also, the Alberta Real Estate Association and RECA are posting. Many brokers are engaged in the community from different brands, and we are all rallying behind the Calgarians and surrounding area under those circumstances, and we wish you the very best in the coming month. Thank you.